reading, if I were to look at the movie, at first I'm kind of like, kill. But with the book, even more so, I'm like, Peeta is so pure and so genuine and so kind and so protective. Yes. He's a man, but he's also like full of heart and love. But not yet a woman. So I don't know. I think I really, because you see Gail's tendencies. Yeah. If they're expressed well in the movie, like you see the tendencies already with Gail. Like he's going to be the follower of.
We can wait till we get to the third book.
I was gonna say, yeah. I really need to read it. I've only read them once all the way through. Like I've seen the movies a bunch.
So I've been like reading Perelandra and this, and I keep wanting to just read this.
Have you finished Perelandra? I know you've already read it.
I've already read it, and I kind of skimmed through the last part of it, and I was asking Wes some questions to brush up. So here we are, Perelandra.
All right.
Having dinner.
I just wanted to
Here we are at Drinkling's Coffee House in Wilmore, Kentucky. This is Verum Fabula Fellowship, and it's the November the 8th, correct?
Yes.
Look at that. I got a date right.
Ooh. You're amazing.
I am amazing. And we're going to run through as much of Perelandra as we can get through tonight. Does anybody remember where we left off?
So ask that.
Huh?
So ask that because we get to finish it.
Weren't we kind of
pretty much right where they're like discussing things like him and
Weston and he's still West? No, is he still Weston?
So I didn't remember if we had. So the three people having the conversation, is it the Green Lady? That's where we're at.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
wait a minute. We're at where they finally are all sitting down and debating.
yes, the big debate, the three.
I think said bathing. I did too. I don't remember that part.
Well, they might be.
They're all bathing together.
Really, they're all getting it back. At the same time.
So they're starting the conversation. So, does anybody have any thoughts before we get started about the conversation? Because we're going to try to get through the three conversations: Green Lady, Weston, and Ransom, and then Ransom and the Ransom and Maleldil conversation, and then what follows after that.
Okay.
So, what were some of the thoughts coming into about all the philosophy? Well, let me set this up a little differently. What's interesting? I've been reading Walter Hooper's companion guide to C.S. Lewis, and if you've never read that, it's actually quite informative. It's like a massive book, but it breaks down every C.S. Lewis thing he's ever written, and it's Walter's take on what's going on, and Walter's pretty much a stalwart in his own right. He's pretty fantastic. Lewis did not start Perelandra to create an alternate Garden of Eden story. He had an image in his head of floating islands, and the rest of the story came afterwards. And he was saying, there's a letter he wrote to Sister Penelope where they're talking about, he said, how can a God let free creatures, what would happen if a free creature would choose the thing that God wanted them to choose freely so God could give them the thing that he wanted to give them and that they didn't fall? What would that look like? And he said, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can write this book. It's too hard. But if I can, if I can get close, it'd be worth me trying to do it. And so to know that he didn't, again, if you know the end of the book before you begin the book, it's propaganda. He wasn't writing some Christian propaganda stuff. This effervesced and came out of wrestling questions out, which is just absolutely fantastic. So we're wrestling with questions here, and you see, what is the tactic of the enemy, which is what it always is. One of the questions that we're dealing with here is a parallel. How many conversations did the serpent have with Eve? Do we know?
Depends on your interpretation.
It does. So what is the Unman's, what is his tactic here? with
What
her.
part? The very beginning?
The conversation. He starts having conversation. What is his ultimate goal?
Well, how do you mean? There's so many goals.
Right. So what I'm saying is, what is Satan's maneuver every time? What's his maneuver? His maneuver is to slightly alter you. Just get you to give on something to where he can get a foothold in. He comes from multiple angles to her. That's what you're saying. He comes with multiple attacks.
Yeah. Well, he also has several different agendas. At the same
Yes.
time. Yeah. Like he's got the goal at one point of getting her to like engage in vanity, which will then lead to something else, which will then lead to something else, which then will lead to going to fixed lands, which is his ultimate goal to get her to fall.
To get her to fall.
Yeah.
So he's trying all these attacks to all right, let me go this way, let me go this way, which the enemy never tires. That's the thing, is the enemy is never tired of his ransom. Oh my gosh.
This is like, I was surprised that after I finished it, I was like, there's no way Nina likes this. This is like horror. I mean, this like reminds me of like a horror movie.
It is.
There's some really grotesque, like.
Listen to the audiobook version of it.
Oh man.
But the last third of the book is really like something you'd see in a horror movie.
It is dark.
Yeah. It's funny because he actually goes here a little bit earlier than most horror films and most horror stories actually went in terms of like being willing to go down that road in particular. Not a very common thing in 20th century literature, 20th century films. They just do not really want to deal with demonic possession and also the scarier parts of the soul. This is not present in much literature or films until this in The Exorcist.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this is like real scary. You know, it's like there's scary movies I can watch because I always love them, but as I've gotten older, I'm like, they're not really good for you. So I don't watch them anymore, but I will still watch. This is like me coming into being Nina.
Here comes Big Nina.
Yeah,
welcome to the
So you
world.
have Weston inviting the unman in and saying, I am God.
But you know what? Like, I can enjoy this kind of story because it's so obvious. It's good versus evil.
Yeah.
It's evil at the foundations of the world, and someone who is sent to save that world.
Yeah.
So
And it's a good point because in most horror movies you don't get to see who the hero is, and maybe not till the end, if ever.
Yeah, and a lot of it's very gratuitous. It's just they do it for horror's sake, not all of it, and so I think with this kind of story, it's all meant for one thing. You know, it's all pointing to. Yeah, it's like the creation of the world. Will evil conquer good? All that. It's like any hero villain story, but this is way more deep, obviously, which I think it's all derives from.
And it's
the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Harry Potter, Voldemort and Harry.
And I think the good horror films do have a good, like Oculus is my favorite horror movie of all time, and like I can watch that movie over and over. It's so good, but it has a sense of you know who the good guy is, you know who the evil is, and it's sad because the good guy doesn't win, but that's like the plot twist that doesn't win, and you expect every horror movie at least ends in some kind of sense of like closure. There's like no closure at the end, the evil is still in the house doing the things that the evil does, just gets sold off to it's a mirror and it gets sold off to another family. So
It's like a Fallen jumping.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen Fallen?
I don't think so. It's a movie.
It's a good movie.
Well, you probably would like it, but it's a demon jumps from body to body.
Oh.
And
It Follows is another one.
You'll hear a song in the movie that you'll never be able to listen to the same way.
Yeah, it's true.
afterwards.
It's true. I love
And
that.
It's such a great song, and you're like,
I hate it when horror movies ruin songs.
I know.
There's actually, it's funny you're talking about this. There's this line in the book when he's talking about kind of the sneering and jeering of the Unman as he's kind of like leering at Ransom all the time, and it actually is interestingly connected to Faust.
Ooh.
Mephistopheles.
Yes.
And this passage.
You'll have to explain.
Yeah.
I've not read those people.
Love Faust. Love Faust.
It's some dense stuff. It's actually it's very akin to this in terms of its basically its dialogue. Most of the Bill Ball is dialogue, but this one in particular has a lot of themes that's similar. and this is kind of where some people think he got the description from this passage. That I like to hear, we shall, I hope, bear with each other, for to dispel thy crotchets, brother. As a young lord I now appear, in scarlet dress trimmed with gold lacing, a stiff silk cloak with stylish fancing, a tall cock's feather in my hat, a long sharp rapier to defend me, and I advise thee, short and flat, in the same costume to attend me, if thou wouldst, unembarrassed, see what sort of thing this life may be. Which I don't even want to take the time to unpack that. This was super dense, but it's really, really, really interesting when you compare that. And then also the clothing part, which he circles back around to later, which I think he may have been inspired to do.
Would you compare that to that scene right there? That's Faust?
That's Faust. That's from Faust.
Okay.
And it's comparing him in terms of the posturing, but also in terms of the cleverness. Like from the beginning, for to dispel thy crotchets, dear brother, as a young lord I now appear. And to me it does two things. One of them is it describes the end in particular with the clothing, but also the transformation of Weston to the Unman.
Yep.
Which is really, really clever. And I don't know if, sometimes people read into these things a bit much, but I would probably think that Lewis pulled out of that, because it's really, really, really akin. It's just the transformation is super, super.
Well, there's two thoughts. One, he was influenced by it, or two, there's no way to write an honest demonic possession without having that appear.
Could be.
So either of those would work. I'm willing to give because Lewis was steeped in Faust and those things. So
and Paradise Lost. Also
Paradise Lost. So what happens when you sell your soul?
Yeah.
Manfred's very similar to that too.
We should go into that. I don't know if I want to go into that part.
Well, I'm just saying that's what the Unman did. He He gave.
He
sold his soul, and so that's what in Faust that's what happens. He sells his soul. In Manfred, that's the same thing. Lord Byron's story. That's what happened. He sells his soul to the devil. So there's a price to be paid for that. And the Unman figures out what the price is way too late.
I keep wanting to jump ahead because there's a lot of connecting threads there with that whole thing too.
This is our last one, isn't it, for this book?
We're going to try.
All right, let's do it.
We're going to try. Now, the thing is, we can go through some themes that we're going to miss. There is so much in these conversations. You could probably spend a good year going through the conversations, because the philosophy and theology inside of these conversations that you're pulling on, because there's the vanity issue, there's the disobeying issue.
How he died is a whole.
So let's see here. I want to get to. So now Ransom is quiet for most of these conversations. Why do we think that is? What is Ransom's state of mind?
You mean when the Unman is talking?
So he comes upon Weston talking to the Green Lady. He's mortified, but he doesn't really say anything. He just listens for a while. What is his reticence? I know he's English, but what else? It's good manners, right?
Really. One of the things is he doesn't really know what the tactic is to start. He often expresses that in the narrative, but then he also has trouble because, like we talked about before, the young man uses truth to his advantage. Just bends it slightly towards the end, and then Ransom always cuts in at the end when the truth has been bent, and that's when he feels like his opportunity is to speak. But before that, so often he's just saying true things, and to break in would be to just interrupt someone's just talking about the way things are. He talks about so much about our world and how it is, and all the things that actually happen in our world for women and all this, and he especially glamorizes glamorizes the heroines and the stories, but he breaks in and he's basically losing ground because he's interrupting. I think that's a big motivator for him.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there's a number of other things that could be said, but to me that's the strongest one. From when I was reading it lately, I was like, you can't cut him because then he would be actually wrong to cut him.
And whenever he does the first few conversations, remember I think it says like his thoughts were, oh no, I just did the opposite of what I wanted to do, because then she would get on a thread of going down that road, and then Weston would use what he said against him almost.
Yeah.
So it's like when he would interrupt a few times in the beginning, I remember the first few conversations being like, dang, it's like you're watching a fight, and it's like you swung at the exact time that they were about to smack you in the face, and then you should have been blocking, you were swinging. I feel like that's what he does a lot.
Am I
of
making
time.
it worse?
Yeah, and I think he felt like he was.
Yeah, and he in some regards he was, because and he also I tell in my own life, it's if you don't know where you're going, how can you push the gas?
Yeah.
You know, because you like if you push the gas, you're going in the wrong direction, then you've just wasted time. But if you don't push the gas in the right direction, then you're wasting time. So you're kind of in that paradoxical.
It's like that quote, if you don't know, is this C.S. Lewis or Peterson or somebody? Somebody like that. But it says, if you don't know at which port you sail, then no direction is beneficial. No, that's a Seneca quote, I think.
That does
That's
sound.
Seneca. Yeah, if you don't know at which port you sail, then no wind is beneficial.
Right. That's exactly. So he doesn't know what his purpose here is yet. He still doesn't know what he's supposed to do. Is he supposed to just wait until the Unman says an untruth and then correct it? Because that leaves a lot of opportunity for the lady to get tripped up. And so he's understanding that the more time she spends with him, the more influence he has, the greater her chances of slipping and falling. This is one that we'll read. It is a great branching out, it was saying. I like how he calls it now, because it's not even human. The way it moves is like it doesn't know how to move a body correctly. It's like this making a story or poetry about things that might be but are not. If you shrink back from it, are you not drawing back from the fruit that is offered you? Man, that is a twist. That is a twist. It is not from making a story I shrink back, O stranger, she said, but it is from this one story that you have put into my head. I can make myself stories about my children or the king. I can make it that fish fly and that land beasts swim. But if I try to make it a story about the fixed land I do not know how to make it about Maleldil. For if I make it that he has changed his command, that will not go. And if I make it that we are living there against his command, that is like making the sky black and the water so we cannot drink it, or the air so we cannot breathe it. But also, I do not see what is the pleasure of trying to make these things. It's a great response. To make you wiser and older, said Weston's body. Do you know for certain that it will do that? She asked. Yes, for certain, he replied. That is how the women of my world have become so great and so beautiful.
No, it's not.
Do not listen to him, broke in Ransom. Send him away. Do not hear what he has to say. Do not think of it.
Yeah, I mean, everybody knows the women of our world have become more beautiful because of plastic surgery, right? That's what it is. That's what.
Yes.
What it is, for sure.
Now, this is what you were talking about here. She's like, why do you start speaking before this man is finished, Piebold?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just goes
But
against
then,
it.
What do you?
He should have been blocking.
Yes,
swinging.
but what? Do you watch somebody just get pummeled
It's so tricky.
and beaten, or do you step in? If you step in, you're like, what are you doing? Why are you stepping in?
Uh-huh.
And so it's a no-win situation right now.
well, there's an interesting thing here that I think that Lewis is pointing at that is surprising when you read the Genesis 3 narrative. In comparison to this, the relative space that it takes up with the rest of the story, Eve's decision to take the fruit, is so minor. Mm-hmm. But in this, the lady repels so many times on her own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Even without Ransom's help. And later on down the line, as he's debating with Maleldil himself, he's talking about what are the vessels that Maleldil has sent, and he said it is he or she and I, and it's like in this instance, it's almost like they're on the same team, but she doesn't really know it,
right?
But yet she repels so many times and steps back into the good that Maleldil wants so many times. It's really interesting because it's almost like, I don't want to say it's mansplaining because it's not, but at times Ransom steps in when he doesn't need to, because she ends up turning it to a more logical train of thought. And I think that if he noticed how well she did that with him from the first time, he might have been a little less angsty. But at the same time, he has no idea what's going on. And he's in this situation where he's just thrown into the deep end, and he's just like Caitlin was saying, he's just trying to swim and trying to do his best.
Well, if it was just Weston, she could handle Weston.
Yeah.
But someone with ancient knowledge, someone in the divine council who,
like an infinite amount of knowledge. Like you just let him keep doing his little stories of history, just keep going.
Yes, and so how do you defeat that? It's like sometimes someone talks so much you need to punch him in the mouth just to get him to shut up. It's like stop talking.
And the other thing too is that he almost is defeated by him several times in terms of his own internal struggle.
Yes,
which is another factor to throw in there, which is probably what makes him all the more panicky in this situation, because he's like, I know where I'm at.
The entire civilization, the innocence of this world hangs by a thread. And he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to do it, what he's supposed to do. I do not want you to hear him at all, says Ransom. He is, and then he hesitated. Bad, liar, enemy. None of these words would, as yet, have meaning for her. Racking his brain, he thought as their previous conversation about the great Eldil, who had held on to the old good, refuse anew. Yes, that would be her only approach to the idea of badness. He was just about to speak, but it was too late. Weston's voice anticipated him. This, Piebald had said, does not want you to hear me because he wants to keep you young. He does not want you to go on to the new fruits that you have never tasted before. How could he want to keep me younger? Have you not seen already, said Weston's body, that Piebald is the one who shrinks back from the wave that is coming towards us and would like, if he could, to bring back the wave that is past. In the very first hour of his talking with you, did he not betray this? He did not know that all was new since Maleldil became a man, and that all creatures will, with reason, will be men. You had to teach him this. And when he had learned it, he did not welcome it. He was sorry that there would be no more of the old furry people. He would bring back the old world if he could. And he would ask, and when you ask him to teach you death, he would not. He wanted you to remain young, not to learn death. What is not he who first put into your mind the very thought that it was possible not to desire the way that Maleldil was rolling towards us, to shrink as much as you would cut off your arms and legs to prevent it coming. He is what we call in my world bad. He flipped it. Completely flipped it. Yeah. And he had evidence.
His energy against it.
Yes, evidence. It was a judo move, or where you use the other person's momentum and just flipped it around, and Ransom's defenseless because it's correct, and it looks like he's the bad guy now.
Yeah.
So he's going to have to endure this him being
Been there.
Yeah. Now this isn't. Yeah.
Been there.
So this idea. There's an idea that Hooper brings up that we'll get into just a minute, but this idea of death. Death has not come yet. What's the first taste of death that we get in Perelandra?
The frogs.
Yes, the frogs.
Yeah. I almost lost my crap. I was like, almost put the book down. I was like, no.
This is worse than Oculus.
Oh, for sure.
Well, I mean, just to take something so pure and just for no reason to take your fingernail and just open it up just to kill it, just to be
I actually
doing it.
opened my phone and was going to text you two in a group, but it was like midnight. And I started texting, I was like, these frogs. I was like, don't send it, it's midnight.
Listen, I turn my phone off at night, so you can text anytime.
Okay, that made me feel bad. I literally almost said, these frogs.
Yep.
And then Ransom has to kill one himself.
And struggling against God.
It's pretty much just as worse, if not worse.
I don't remember that part. What happened?
Yeah, that's like
He tries to kill it and he can't. He's like beating
he
it
just put it out of
and
its misery.
he's trying to kill it because it's suffering. He's like, I need to kill this to put out its
It's
misery.
like my worst fear of all time. It's like my worst fear.
And so that's the first. It's the
Like
first
what
bit of
happened to
death
Kato
that's
in the
come.
Hunger Games.
I'm trying to remember. Yeah, it is.
It's like all night long suffering and torture.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Will you teach us?
Questions like, if you bring up the Hunger Games one more time.
Let's read the Hunger Games.
That was worse in the book than it was in the movie.
Hey,
Yes, it
when I was
was.
in college, every was like Wednesday or Thursday night at Willie T in the library, because the library is massive. Someone would do the whistle and would do this, and everybody would stand up and do it back every week.
Such a good. That's District 12.
That used to be our ringtone.
We lost a ringtone.
Yeah. Will you teach us death? The lady said to Weston Shape. Yes, it is for this that I came here. So now we have his mission. Because what did the White Witch say was her? What was her lot? What was her bounty?
Chew bubble gum.
Yes, that was it. To eat Turkish delights.
Can't use that quote on the podcast. Yeah, what? So you sorry, what was it?
She said the blood of all traitors belongs to
Oh, yes, yeah.
death. Which is, it's the greatest fear of man, is to be conscious and living and to lose that. And yet, that's why for me one of the greatest, I love the scripture that says, death, where's your sting, grave? Where's your victory? Because that's what the enemy brings. The enemy brings death, because with death he can control, and you can persuade and coerce, because if you don't do this, then death is waiting for you, and it's something to manipulate around.
Or fear. That's like what the big thing
And fear.
out of the silent planet, and I think that led to this thing.
Yes.
Like the fear of all these things that Ransom was terrified of, and now the ultimate fear is death, and like being able to use the biggest thing you should be afraid of. You know.
It's the greatest fear to bring death into a world that knows not death. Because he lived without fear. And now that death is here, then that will bring fear, which will bring greed and corruption and uncertainty. Because the thing with death is life is risk management, right?
Yeah.
We're going to die. We're going to die, but when?
Yeah.
You don't know. It's like health insurance. You get health insurance because you're going to get sick, but you don't know what it is, how bad it's going to be, and when it's going to be.
Yeah.
Death is the same thing, and so we have an uncertainty there, and that uncertainty will cause us to enact in certain behaviors, and those certain behaviors will dictate whether we become a child of light or a child of darkness, and those things propel us. So now we have Weston's mission. His mission is to bring death. But we still don't have Ransom's mission yet. He doesn't know what his mission is.
That's what makes it so much worse. It's like he doesn't know what he's there to do. He knows they're the bad guys, but he doesn't know he's supposed to be the good guy. Not till later, right?
Not long later.
Yeah. And my question is answered that you guys looked at me like I was dumb 2 weeks ago. When I said, is Ransom's name because he used to be the ransom, and you guys were like, I was like,
I didn't mean to look at you like that. I didn't want to say it.
I was like, it was silent for a solid 15 seconds. I was like, well, either I just hit the nail on the head or I completely whiffed. Like, one of the two.
Yeah.
And then I read it. I was like, well.
So the fruit here is the fixed land, right? That's the Satan takes the one thing that's not allowed and gets you to fix it upon that. And I don't know if that's true, and that's true in my life. It's the one thing that it's like it's out of reach, and then you're fixated on it, and you obsess about it, and it's the one thing you have to have, and you can't get away from it. And he breaks it, and he's like, "Oh, but he wants you. He wants you to disobey. Like, well, he can't ask you to disobey because that would be a weird thing for him to do. But he can't wait till you're not holding his hand anymore, and you just hear and it's like, no, I know this voice. I've talked to this person before. I know this. So
It's interesting how childlike the temptation is too. If you think about it from that perspective, it's like tempting a young child, because the original prohibitions are mainly from our parents, and our conscience hasn't really grown into fruition. And
Right.
so what you have here is just basically, an older kid tempting this younger kid to do what their parents tell them not to do. Throw the ball out the window.
right.
And it's like it's much more complex, obviously, but it's essentially, it boils down to that one issue, which is just, I'm going to get you to do the thing you're not supposed to do, even though you know you're not supposed to do it.
Yeah.
And he even tries to use the strategy of telling them, well, this is actually what your dad wants, or this is what your parents want.
Yeah.
It would be hard with a window and a ball, but
Then turns God into a liar if you accept that truth. I was thinking about it. It's like, I've actually heard this, some rabbi, I don't know what it was, but it was a YouTube video where he basically explains creation in that way, where that's what God wanted. He wanted Eve to take the fruit. And I was like, this is insane. Like, you're basically calling God a liar because God is telling you not to do something. And you're saying that He really wants you to do it. So then it's kind of like lying in the process.
So he's entrapment.
Yeah.
In a sense, he's entrapping you to do the bad thing. Yeah.
I don't think God plays mind games like that.
Right, absolutely.
now, then again, and this is, I'm sure that Rabbi would come back with this, but there's a way around it. He would say, but if God is omnipotent, then He knew that they were going to do that from the beginning. So letting them do the thing, He is letting them play out the thing that is going to happen. However, you can counter that by simply saying there's a difference between allowing the child to do the thing that you know is going to hurt them because you love them, versus doing the thing that making them do the thing that you know is going to hurt them because you want them to, and then thereby it's a difference between. But when Ransom says this, there's a difference between predestination and free will. But then Ransom actually makes it into the same thing, which is really interesting.
Yes.
I like that a lot too.
Yeah, I think what David said there is a fantastic way to look at it. If you're a Molinist, you have no problem with any of this. If you guys know what Molinism is, you can. So Molinism is, so God knows every possibility that will happen, and in every possibility that will happen, He creates a world where the greatest good will happen. But in the fact of knowing, have you seen the movie Next with Nicolas Cage? Like, he can see like a bunch of things are going to happen, and he chooses the best path. He can always see like 2 minutes ahead or something like that. So God can see every possible scenario that any created being would freely choose, and then He creates a world where the most free creatures choose the best things, and that world plays out. And the free creatures are still choosing freely, but He's the one who created the world to allow them to choose freely.
Yeah. From that perspective, actually, Ransom kind of gives a similar perspective in this. From that perspective, he chose to let the creatures do what they were doing, knowing that it would lead to this moment when this being would be on this planet, and then there would be another choice, and that choice would then be refused. And He would have it like a different glory, is what we called it. And yeah, it's an interesting one. That whole section where we kind of haven't really gotten there yet, but that whole section when he's debating within himself on what to do, and then the conclusion he draws to that is so interesting. And it really can't be understood in chunks. It has to be taken as a whole. And it's really hard because you have to follow the whole line of logic and keep it all in your brain. And it's kind of like water in the hand. If you don't basically memorize the whole thing, it runs through and it comes out, and then you have to go back and get it again.
Well, let's hit that right after we get to this, because I think that needs to, because there's some stuff in there that I still wrestle with a lot. She says, I want to go to sleep. He says, not yet. There is more. He has not told you that it was the breaking of the commandment which brought Maleldil to our world, and because of which he was made man, he dare not deny it. Do you say this, piebald? Asked the lady. Ransom was sitting with his fingers locked so tightly his knuckles were white. The unfairness of it all was wounding him wounding him like barbed wire. Unfair. How could Maleldil expect him to fight against this? To fight with every weapon taken from him, forbidden to lie, yet brought to places where truth seems fatal. It was unfair. A sudden impulse of hot rebellion rose in him. A second later, doubt like a huge wave came breaking over him. How if the enemy were right after all? Felix peccatum ade. Even the church would tell him the good came from disobedience in the end. And yes, it was true that he, Ransom, was a timid creature, a man who shrank back from new and hard things. On which side, after all, did the temptation lie? Progress passed before his eyes in a great momentary vision. Cities, armies, tall ships, and libraries, and fame and grandeur of poetry spreading like a fountain out of the labors of ambitions of men. Who could be certain that creative evolutions were not the deepest truths? From all sorts of secret crannies in his own mind, whose very existence he had never before suspected, something wild and heady and delicious began to rise, to pour itself towards the shape of Weston. It is a spirit. It is a spirit, said the inner voice. You are only a man. It goes on from century to century. You are only a man. Do you say this, piebald? Asked the lady a second time. The spell was broken. I tell you what I say, answered Ransom, jumping to his feet. Of course good came from it. Is Maleldil a beast that we can stop his path, or a leaf that we can twist his shape? Whatever you do, he will make good of it. It is not the good he had prepared for you if you had obeyed him. That is lost forever. The first king and the first mother of our world did the forbidden thing. He brought good of it in the end, but what they did was not good, and what they lost we have not seen. And there were some to whom no good came, nor ever will come. He turned to the body of Weston. You, he said, tell her all. What good came to you? Do you rejoice that Maleldil became man? Tell her of your joys, of what profit you had when you made Maleldil and death acquainted. In that moment, followed this speech. Two things happened that were utterly unlike terrestrial experience. The body that had been Weston's threw its head up and opened its mouth and gave a long, melancholy howl like a dog. The lady lay down and, wholly unconcerned, closed her eyes, was instantly asleep. And then the part that he just begins to say, hours later, the unman began to speak. It did not even look in Ransom's direction, slowly and cumbrously, as if by some machinery that needed oiling, made its mouth open and lips pronounced his name. Ransom. 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 What is it? Nothing. Broken.
Great passage.
Broken. The enemy was broken by truth. And it was the undoing. That is one of my favorite parts of the whole book. He just stands there. It's like, no, tell the truth. Did you enjoy Maleldil coming down? What happened when you made he and death acquainted? Was it good for you? Be honest. And it's like just the enemy had no answer. And it was just this beautiful moment of truth shining through that he wasn't defenseless. He wasn't without Maleldil. He wasn't alone in that. He had truth on his side, and when it came down to it, there was no coming back from that. The Unman was undone at that moment.
To me, that's the zenith of his theological points in this book. Just every time I read that passage, I just get super pumped.
Yes.
Yeah, every single time, and there's a couple reasons for it. Obviously, it's great literature, but it's just a palpable reminder of what we are and where we are and why. And it's hard to not. When truth is spoken like that and spoken in the face of evil, it's hard to not just feel the Spirit move in that moment. It's just always so tangible.
It is the truth you knew but didn't know that you knew that deeply, and when the chord strikes, it reverberates through your entire being, and you're like, yes, that's it. Yeah. Throw your fist in the air and go, come on.
That's right.
Shuck that corn, brother. Preach it.
Shuck that corn. There's one I have not heard that.
You have not heard that one? Yeah, you have not.
I hear it from him.
You have not grown up in Kentucky, then that is.
I grew up in Indiana. We shucked a lot of corn. I never heard that one.
You know what? You're right. You should have heard it.
Have you heard it's tight but it's right?
I've heard that.
No.
I've heard that one.
Well, we came from a very vocal church,
Yeah.
literal amen corners. So you had to have some kind of catchphrase. You know, you had to have your own personal
Shuck
catchphrase.
that corn, brother.
Shuck that corn. That's tight, but that's right, brother. Come on now.
What does shuck that corn mean in church, though?
Huh?
What does that mean?
Keep on
If you're
preaching.
shucking corn with another corn, like you're going really quick and pop, pop, and so you're really hitting a
It's
groove.
an agrarian reference to something you can't really experience.
Yes. That's right.
Hold on, David.
I have shucked quite a bit of corn.
And you'll hit
I can understand it.
you'll hit a groove where you're really,
Oh, yeah.
and so that groove is what there's.
Boom, boom. You get like 2 pulls and it's gone.
Yeah.
Groove.
That's impressive.
So you're like, hey, this is you're hitting it, man. You're hitting that groove, and so keep going.
Brings me back to my childhood. Shucking corn.
So let's get to what David was bringing up, the conversation between Ransom and Maleldil. And what were some key things in there that really, because there's some great stuff in there, and we skipped a ton in the other stuff, but we need to move it along.
So much stuff in this passage. I think one of the really interesting themes he touches on here is just conversations with the Spirit that we have so often that we don't really think we're having, and we trick ourselves out some, and we trick ourselves into believing we don't have. And just like it's for Ransom, it's inescapable. This is exactly what's happening at that moment. It's just like the Spirit of God is definitely talking to him, and he's absolutely aware of it. Like getting, as he said, getting it thrown back in his face.
Yes.
And
The voluble self.
yeah, and it's quite interesting to me that he does it so well. He lays it out so well, and you can catch threads of it in your own thoughts and in your own conversations, and your own debates. That's what I love about reading this section every single time. I catch something new, some new evasion that I've tried, something I've tried in the past, or something that the trick of the enemy's trying to work on me now. It's just really, really compelling stuff. That was my first thought about the whole thing. I want to wait until a couple more things are said, 'cause the tail end of it is what I want to talk about.
So what we have here is we have the sort of the ransom coming down and being rebuffed by the innocence and purity of the Green Lady, and then he's pushing back on her. So it kind of reminds me of good philosophy exists, and for no other reason than to refute bad philosophy type thing. And so the whole book, you see, there's these Steelman arguments being brought up that we wrestle with ourselves, and throughout the Socratic dialogue that we have, Lewis pulls it around and says, well, let's wrestle these ideas out, and may the best idea come. 2 men enter, 1 man leave. And sometimes Ransom wins, and sometimes he doesn't. And so now Ransom's arguing with himself. Now it's the introspective. So he's made an ally with the lady. He's defeated the Unman, and now he has to conquer himself, which is the hardest to conquer. Because, as David said, we have to go into the dark places, the dark soul, the dark places of our mind, and that's scary. That's actually the scariest place for us to go, is understanding the fact that we're a monster, or that there's stuff in us that's ungodly and unholy and has to be rooted out, because that's painful, because that's a part of us that we have to lose. We have to sort of have this molten thing of letting go of, this is the end of me, and I'm being reborn, and constantly being reborn into something hopefully more flourishing and more like Christ.
Are we going to get to the end tonight?
I don't know if we'll try. We're going to try. I'll be surprised. So the voluble self protested wildly and swiftly like a propeller of the ship racing when it's out of the water. The imprudence of the unfairness and absurdity of it. Did Maleldil want to lose worlds? What was the sense of arranging things that anything really important should finally and absolutely depend on such a man of straw as himself? So he's having some, he knows that he's not up to the task. And at that moment, far away on earth, as he now could help remembering, men were at war, white-faced, subalterns and freckled corporals who had but lately begun to shave, stood in horrible gaps or crawled forward in the deadly darkness, awakened like him, and to the preposterous truth that all really depended on their actions. Why not me? In a sense, everybody's got their cross bearing. Everybody is.
Victor Frankl right there.
Yes, it is.
Ties the bow at the end of the chapter really well on that. He starts it off here, and then basically the rest of the entire dialogue is leading back to the conclusion of that point. Leading.
And far away in time, Horatius stood at the bridge, and Constantine settled his mind whether he would or would not embrace the new religion. Eve herself stood looking upon the forbidden fruit, and the heavens of heavens waited for her decision. He writhed and ground his teeth, but could not stop seeing. Thus, and not otherwise, the world was made. Either something or nothing must depend on individual choices. And if something, who could set the bounds to it? A stone may determine the course of a river. He was that stone at this horrible moment, which had become the center of the whole universe. The Maleldil of the world and the sinless organisms of everlasting light were silent in deep heaven to see what Elwyn Ransom of Cambridge would do. That's a heck of a lot of pressure. Because he mentioned before that maybe Perelandra is the center of the universe, not Theological anymore. And so it's up to him. He has to make the right choice or the entire thing has to fall. Then came the blessed relief. He suddenly realized that he did not know what he could do. He almost laughed with joy. All this horror had been premature. No definite task was before him. And all that was demanded of him when general and preliminary resolution was to oppose the enemy in any mode which circumstances might show to be desirable. In fact, he flew back into the comforting words as a child flies back into his mother's arms to do his best. And that's what he'd been doing. Where do you
Who's not been there?
Yeah.
I've totally been there.
Exactly.
That's a good one.
So God says, go do this. And you're like, I don't know how to do it. It's like, just do your best.
Yeah.
Just put one foot in front of the other and let's knock this
It's funny
out.
when you're reading it, you read other people's, you're like, why don't you just do it? Obviously, that's going to
Yeah,
take care
and
of
then
you.
too, and you're like,
You're like, I
Goes through
can't.
very quickly.
I'm going to
It's
fail.
like 10 times easier for us, and we're like, no, I'm not doing it.
It just seems so obvious when you read someone else's story.
Yeah.
Every time, it's always like, if he told you to do this, he's obviously going to take care of you. But then when it's us, it's like, well, I'm obviously messing it up.
I'm not
So
doing it.
he's not going to come through because I'm messing it up.
And I love how at some point, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead too much, tell me, but it's the same conversation. But I love how when he says, you get to hear this back and forth in his head, the wrestling. And I loved getting to hear that. He's like, well, what about this? But what? Then he compares it to his situation, with Earth and Eve. And he was like, well, wait, this isn't the same. It can't be the same.
Right.
God doesn't do the same thing twice. And so when he says, this is such a Lewis, I could have told you Lewis wrote this. When he says, see if I can find it. He says,
What happened on the earth when Maleldil was born as a man? And
no, close. Right before, right after that, I think.
Oh, as the lady had said, the same wave never came twice.
Yes. Okay. So yes, keep going on that same line, and then skip like one paragraph, and it says, "This can't go on. The stopping of a third-degree solicitation, already more than once refused, was a problem to which the terrestrial fall offered no clue. A new task, and for that new task, a new character in the drama, who appeared most unfortunately to be himself. In vain did his mind hark back, time after time, to the book of Genesis, asking, what would have happened? But to this, the darkness gave him no answer." And then I have to read this. This is just like, I'm going to go back to a group search. But that quote when he just says, but no answer. And I just think back about how sometimes God just gives us so much severe mercy and how, something we just can't, we can't hold that answer. There's no answer. There is an answer, but we can't obtain that answer, And so then it reminds me of this quote from a group of observers. He says, "When I lay these questions before God, I get no answer, but a rather special sort of no answer. It is not a locked door. It is more like a silent, certainly not uncompassionate, gaze, as though he shook his head, not in refusal, but waving the question, like, peace, child, you just don't understand." That just reminded me so much of reading through this. Of he lets him work it all out, and he lets him fight it all out and come to conclusions on his own, and then the last one, which is this big question, he just lets him just sit. No answer. But it's not an uncompassionate answer. It's just a no answer.
So Ransom thinks the whole world is his response. He holds the whole world in his hands, but in fact, God has the entire thing under control. So he says, hello, what is this? He sat straight up, upright again. His heart was beating wildly against his side. His thoughts had stumbled on an idea from which they started back as man starts back when he has touched a hot poker. By this time, the idea was really too childish to entertain. This must be a deception risen from his own mind. It stood to reason that a struggle with the devil meant a spiritual struggle. The notion of a physical combat was only fit for a savage, if it were as simple as that. But here the voluble self had made a fatal mistake. The habit of imaginative honesty was too deeply ingrained in Ransom to let him toy for one more second that, with the pretense that he feared bodily strife with the Unman less than he feared anything else. Vivid pictures crowded upon him. The deadly cold of his hands. He had touched the creature accidentally some hours before. The long metallic nails ripping off the narrow strips of flesh, pulling out tendons. One would die slowly. Up to the very end of cruel idiocy would smile into one's face. One would give way long before one died, beg for mercy, promised it'd help, worship, anything. It was fortunate that something so horrible should be so obviously out of the question, almost but not quite. Ransom decreed that whatever the silence and the darkness seemed to be saying about this, no such crude materialistic struggle could possibly be what Maleldil really intended. Any suggestion to the contrary must be his own morbid fancy. It would degrade the spiritual warfare, the conditions for mere mythology. But here he got another check. Long since Mars, and more strongly since he came to Perelandra, Ransom had been perceiving that the triple distinction of truth from myth and both from fact were purely terrestrial. Part and parcel of the unhappy division between soul and body was resulted from the fall. Even the earth, the sacraments existed as a permanent reminder that the division was neither wholesome nor final. The incarnation had been in the beginning of its disappearance. In Perelandra, it would have no meaning at all. Whatever happened here would be of such nature that earthmen would call it mythological. All of this he thought before, now he knew it. The presence of it in darkness, never before formidable, was put these truths into his hand like terrible jewels.
One of the best reputations of metaphysical dualism I've ever heard.
Gosh.
It's unbelievable. Like the Gnostics would just be like, all right, I give up if they read that.
Yeah.
It's unbelievably palpable. It's a trap we still fall into, even in this day and age. The idea that everything, the spirit is the ultimate goal. I mean, even Weston was leading with that to start, right? And then it's basically just thrown back in his face.
He's like, do you know who I am?
Yeah.
I've been around for centuries. I know more than you.
Yeah.
The voluble self was almost thrown out of the argument of stride and became some seconds as the voice of mere whimpering, the child begging to be let off, to be allowed to go home. Then it rallied. It explained precisely where the absurdity of the physical battle with the Unman lay. It would be quite irrelevant to the spiritual issue. If the lady were to be kept in obedience only by forcible removal of the tempter, of what use was that? What would it prove? And if the temptation were not proving or testing, why was it allowed to happen at all? Did Maleldil suggest that our own world might have been saved if the elephant had accidentally trodden on the serpent a moment before Eve was about to yield? Was it as easy, as unmoral as that? The thing was patently absurd. What do you think about that?
Super interesting. Yeah, well, I mean, he answers the question in the next paragraph.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, without the context of everything else, it's easy to understand where he's coming from.
Well, it sounds familiar. It just reminds me when you're grasping for straws, when you're trying to find a way out of a situation, I feel like he's just grasping, which it makes sense. I've asked the same question. I think it makes perfect sense to ask those, but it's funny, he only asks those when he gets under pressure to the need to do something. Like, he doesn't ask those in his day-to-day. He only asks them when he's being called to do something that he doesn't want to do.
He fell back on a different line of defense. How could he fight the immortal enemy? Even if he were fighting a man instead of a sedentary scholar with weak eyes and a baddish wound from his last war, what was the use in fighting it? Could it be killed? Could it? But the answer was almost immediately plain. Weston's body could be destroyed, and presumably that body was the enemy's only foothold in Perelandra. By that body, when the body still obeyed the human will, it had entered a new world. Expelled from it, it would doubtless have no other habitation. Because there was no death, there would be no reason to fall. It would have no power in that land. It would be a spirit without a home.
Mm-hmm.
Spirit of malice floating on the wind like at the end of Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
So Lewis technically kind of baited to it, but not really.
And so I'm trying to get to the point where he says, and so he knows at this point that he is to fight. He is to kill the Unman. That is it. That is why he was been sent there. And then he goes into, it's not for nothing that you were called Ransom.
Yeah, I was like, here we are.
Yes.
Now,
This is what I've been waiting
Finally.
from Johanna in Mockingjay
The Hunger Games.
in the Hunger Games, she gives a line to Katniss that Katniss, anybody can kill anybody, even the president. All you have to do is be willing to sacrifice yourself. He's called Ransom. He is the sacrifice, and Maleldil says, "I was also Ransom." So that answers your
Yeah,
question.
I was like sitting there.
Basically, Hunger Games and Perelandra are the same.
Then basically,
Hey, a good quote though of Viktor Frankl that reminded me of that one you said earlier about the cross is when he said, "This is so Ransom situation." It says, "Sometimes a situation in which a man finds himself may require him to shape his own fate by action. At other times, it is more advantageous for him to make use of an opportunity for contemplation and to realize assets in this way. Sometimes man may be required simply to accept fate and to bear his cross." Which is so good.
that's what he's
That's
doing.
what he's doing.
That's exactly what he's doing.
I was like, is Viktor Frankl in Perelandra?
Oh, that's not
Get her phone in her book.
It shows up in the cave.
Yeah, Viktor
I'm
Frankl's
like,
on page
I missed
77.
that part.
It's like, what do you say, Les, all the time? Some people are born great, some people are become great, and some people have greatness thrust upon them.
Yeah.
It's like, remind me a lot of this.
Because he had no idea. He comes there not knowing now he knows what his mission is.
How'd you like to know that's your mission?
It sounds like an awesome mission to me. That's because I like fighting. So
Like MMA, I got this.
it wouldn't be my challenge, though. It wouldn't be my challenge. My challenge would be something else. Like I thought about that today. I was like,
Wait, didn't you
I was
do
like-
that? Is that something you did?
yeah. I did cage fighting for a
That
while.
just
And I thought,
blows
man,
my
I love
mind.
that. And I'm like, well, then I couldn't
Yours
have
would
never
be the
been
thing
ransom.
that
You could have been
I
Ransom,
couldn't have
yes.
been ransom because that wouldn't have been unenjoyable.
You'd
for
have to
me.
be a
Like, I would
philologist.
get a huge kick out of kicking
Yeah.
the devil's ass.
Oh, yeah.
But it's like it's not.
The thing that you're not good at or you don't
Exactly.
know what to do is what you
Exactly.
need to do.
It would
So-
be something else, like sitting in a closed room for hours.
Right. So there's this notion that demonically possessed people have superhuman strength. Is in the demonology, is that absolutely true?
Lewis says no.
Now Legion
Well,
but Legion was many demons inside of him. And so I think it depends. I think demons, like angels, there are certain demons who have certain qualities, and I don't think that all demons have supernatural strength in that regard. There might be some who do, because you can look at what's the glass, right? And the split. What's it called? The split identity. James McAvoy. Is it called Split?
it's still split.
Okay, yeah, Split. So there is that possibility of that, but Ransom is saying, hey, if it's just two old guys going at it, I got a shot. I'm in better shape than he is. He's big, but he's fat. And then they start to tussle. And the first time he just walks up and sucker punches the guy, and he's like, "Oh, so this is how it's going to go down. We're going to throw down right now." My favorite part is when he locks arms. It's like, we could do this forever. Like no one's getting the upper hand on this.
Anyone who's actually ever grappled in a situation like that, where someone is trying to punch you and you're not trying to get hit, that is actually agonizing. That's the other thing. Like that is a really, really like. Every moment is just like nerve-wracking because at any moment they can push away, break, and hit you with an elbow.
Yeah.
And it's just like that. It's a hard part, but yeah. Are you moving past? Because if not, if you are, I want to mention.
Go ahead.
Because at the end of this, I love this because he ties it actually back into us, and he wraps up with all this stuff about that we were just talking about, basically about what he's called to do. Why me? He asked that question, and it gets thrown back in his face. And then at the end, he says, "As there was no comparison in person, so there was none in suffering, or only such comparison as may be between a man who burns his finger putting out a spark and a fireman who loses his life in fighting a conflagration, because that spark was not put out. He no longer asked, why me? It may as well have been he as any other. It might as well be any other choice as this. The fierce light which he had seen resting on this moment of decision rested in reality on all." And I loved that so much. And this time it sunk in with me so much more than any other time. And it's almost like the butterfly effect in a way when you kind of look at it from a different perspective. But it's just like every moment we have a choice. Every moment we have a choice to do what is right or do what is the enemy is lulling us into. And who knows what difference that choice may make. But it may be that everything rests on a single choice. Because ultimately everything did rest on a single choice. And the kingdom is now, the kingdom is present. The gospel is ever moving, and it's in us. So it's like, as we choose, we are, in effect, just choosing again that which was chosen on our behalf. And it's just such a beautiful picture of what it means to truly live out this just transcendent kingdom calling. I love it.
Yeah. The uniqueness of your suffering is like a big theme in Man's Search for Meaning. It's like, no one can suffer for you. No one can suffer in your place. Like, this is your calling to do this, That's like what got me so amped in the end when he says his unique opportunity lies in the way in which he bears his burden. Nobody else can bear it the way that you can, Just weirdly invigorating. It's like, is it Dostoevsky? How do you say it, Wes?
Dostoevsky.
Yeah, it says, It says, my greatest fear in life is that I'm not worthy of my suffering. That is just...
Gosh. We'll hit one more thing here, and then we know they're fighting, and then next week we'll finish up with
murder and redemption.
Murder and redemption, yes. Murder and redemption. So
murder.
Don't call it muck duck. Call it murder.
But this right here, this was another good thing. This is very foolish, said the young man after he got punched in the face. Do you not know who I am? I know what you are, said Ransom. Which of them? Doesn't matter. Gosh, I love that. That is so dismissive. It's like, it doesn't matter. And you think, little one, it answered, that you can fight with me, and you think he will help you perhaps? Many have thought that. I've known him longer than you, little one. Can't trust him. He's not who he says he is. They all think he's going to help them till they come to their senses, screaming recantations too late in the middle of the fire, moldering in concentration camps, writhing under saws, gibbering in madhouses, or nailed to the crosses. Could he help himself? And the creature suddenly threw back its head and cried in a loud voice that seemed the gold and sky roof must break, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. At that moment, it had been done so. Ransom felt for certain that the sounds it had made were perfect Aramaic of the first century. Mine was not. The Unman was not quoting. It was remembering.
That's creepy stuff right there.
Super intense stuff.
That is it. So,
I was listening to this while I was tilling the land today.
Carrying your burden.
Carrying my burden. And I always imagine this, like, what does this look like in a movie? Because, it's like you enter into that imagination of how those moments look. And I was like,
horrible.
First of all, just the memory. Like, I'm like, oh, they're going to flash back to just a moment of the was it the crucifixion?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the crucifixion, and just
where Jesus says, "My God." So he was quoting. He was quoting Maleldil there,
of course,
saying, "Look, Maleldil couldn't even save himself from me. Do you think you're going to save yourself from me?" So it seems that this was Mephistopheles. This was Satan. This was.
But it's the classic blunder of the evil one. It's always
land war in Asia.
It's always the classic blunder.
Princess Bread.
Sorry.
Derailed.
We will come back one of these days.
Morons.
Aristotle, Plato, Socrates. Oh. Okay. I was gonna make a good point, and you took me off to the
So
Princess
sorry.
Bride. I can't remember.
The classic blunder of the enemy.
It's the classic blunder of the enemy to say, do you think you can defeat me? Not even God could defeat
every
me.
time, because he listed all of these things,
Yeah.
and it's like Voldemort. It's the
The monologue at the end of Deathly Hallows.
Yes.
yeah. It's the imagining that there is no there's sacrifices. Obvious. No one's gonna ever sacrifice themselves. Why would anyone do that? No one's gonna do the right thing. No one's. You're just a pawn. You're this. You're that. But
So the enemy tips his hand a little bit in Job when the spirit walking to and fro, seeking who may devour. God says, "What have you been doing?" And he says, "I've been, looking for people who said, well, you consider Job." He's like, "I know a man will do anything to save his skin." What's he talking about here? He's looking at Ransom, going, "This is going to cost. This is going to cost. This is going to. I'm going to need a pound of flesh." Like,
Interesting, because it's the inverse. It's funny because it's inverse of the Job story a little bit in this one, because he references Job in that diatribe he gives at the end of that passage. Basically, who is Maleldil the beast that you contain him?
yeah.
Like, he basically uses God's words against the enemy in that situation. So like. He actually uses the end of Job, and then the Unman uses the beginning at the end. It's almost like the story's playing out in reverse, and then the Unman is finished, which is pretty interesting.
And then they died. No, I'm just kidding.
that's a Nacho Libre.
It's a Nacho Libre line. So I think we'll leave it there.
That sets us up good for the end.
That sets us up good because the battle is fantastic.
It just goes on and on and on and on and on. It's like,
Which
I think it needed to, because
it did, because it wasn't this thing where he just overcomes him and he's like, no, he runs away and then you got to go chase him, and then
would have cheapened it if it was quick.
And then after
Would have
that,
cheapened
there's
it.
8,000 years of words.
Is that?
If you like liturgy
I was
like
trying to
me,
figure
it's
out
a lot
what
of
part
fun.
does Venus skip. What part? I was trying to figure out what part you skip.
I think it's the end where he's
What part is it? that you-
after the murder.
Basically between the murder and the...
when he actually dies.
When he meets the...
Redemption.
So the mountains. When he's
Yeah, the
running
mountains.
around. Okay. See, I thought that honestly. I'm not gonna lie. I liked majority of this book better than Out of Silent Planet, but I like the ending of Out of Silent Planet better than I like the ending of this one. I really did.
Well,
There was a lot of dialogue at the end of this one. He was there's a lot of
The last,
theological.
10 pages was just like.
It's super dense. There's a lot of he does a lot of high church references.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you don't know them, they're
Yeah,
really.
Yes,
I'm like, let's do this. But everyone else is like,
I'm like, how fast...
I mean, he answers so many questions, and he just
Blessed be over.
it's so much, and you're like, okay, you going home yet? Are you going home yet? Not going home. Okay, all right.
Where's the coffin?
Let's tackle this.
But the end of Out of Silent Planet, I liked. I was obsessed. It was boring in the beginning, but I loved the ending.
next time I'm going to bring in why the end of this book is actually an Anglican prayer service and formula. I'll break it down for you all, but I'm not going to do it.
I can see it.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Has that essay been done?
I don't think so, and I'm not sure that I'm not sure that it's laid out well enough to make that argument. I think there's little threads of it in there, but I'd have to actually go through.
Oh, I think that'd be a fantastic study.
It would be a lot of fun to do, but I also had to find a prayer book from the 1927 prayer book, and right now we have the 67 and the 2019, which are in circulation. So I'm gonna have to look at.
I have a former Anglican priest that probably has one,
an old 27 prayer book.
and I bet Michael Ward could get his hands on one.
I could find it online too, but if I can't, I'll ask.
He's Catholic now.
But he was Anglican priest for a long time. So, yeah. So we are set up great for next time. I was hoping There is so much that we have missed and just skipped over. It was impossible. I've listened to this probably 2 times in the last 3 weeks on audiobook while I've been working, and read it as well. So much of it that is impossible to go. And so we've hit the good parts. And then the murder is fantastic.
I love the murder.
I love the murder part.
That sounds like something I would say.
But I'll throw this out there because Walter Hooper says that it's actually Ransom who introduces death to Perelandra.
Whoa. What?
So wrestle with that.
Wait, now hang on. Does he mean human death?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes. So we know the Unman introduces something, a demise of a being, but the demise of a human life or a life in the representation of Maleldil, the first one of those to be killed in Perelandra, is at the hands of Ransom.
Well, I think that would make sense with it. There's kind of a little leaf by nickel theme at the end of this when it's like he's kind of like wanting to know, like, did I do a good job? And they're like, you just made a choice. You didn't make the right or wrong. So
there is no good.
Yeah, like
there's that one
would have
part.
used whatever happened like he did. Like ultimately, yes, we think he made a good choice, but it's like that kind of goes along with there's still consequences to.
Unless Lewis is saying, because he does mention this one time or 1 or 2 times when he says when Weston or when the Unman talks in the voice of Weston about being dead. So
where have you been, Weston?
Yeah,
that you know that
exactly. Like that part, I'm like, is he actually? Maybe he's saying that Weston's actually dead, and then like the Unman's letting him back out, or he's pretending to let him back out.
That's more what I lean towards.
Yeah. So it's like Weston.
The part where he's on the fish.
Yeah.
And he's like the part where he's on the fish.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that part. Yeah, where he's talking. I couldn't remember when exactly it happened. But yeah, when he's talking about where he's.
Ransom, don't let me die here.
Yeah. He's like, what's down there? What's down? And then he
Don't
talks
let them
about
take me
beneath the
again
crust.
or something.
Yeah.
The rind.
Yeah, beneath the rind. Yeah, he talks about that. I'm wondering if he's like somehow gotten a glimpse of hell.
So if you've seen Fallen, this scene makes a lot of sense at the final, the climax of Fallen, the end of Fallen, and this talking about spiritual, the parasitical moves of the demonic into other beings.
Oh, Fallen is disturbing.
That's something to think about too. So if you haven't seen Fallen, I wouldn't.
It's interesting. His eschatology is different in this book than it is in Great Divorce. A little bit, not a ton, but just a little bit in terms of what he says hell is.
Yeah.
Did you notice that?
I actually didn't. That's very good.
I don't know. He might have changed his mind, or else maybe there's a way to work it in where it makes sense. But I think, also it's kind of Ransom's musings.
I was gonna say it's more like Ransom's point of
I would
view.
say one is the ontological view of hell, and the other would be the epistemological view of hell. Ransom, not Ransom's view, but the Weston's view of hell.
Yeah.
His epistemology of what his experience, his experiential view, instead of what Lewis in Great Divorce is bringing, trying to say ontologically, this is what it would be like.
I also
in a
noticed
sense.
This is for next week, I guess, but I felt there were some similarities between Wrinkle in Time and.
Hey, I just bought that book yesterday. Never read it.
Oh, I thought you read it when we read it. Did we not read it for this?
We read Wrinkle in Time.
Wasn't here yet.
Last year we did A Wrinkle in Time,
No.
didn't we?
I wasn't
Oh,
here
really?
if we did, which is weird because I feel like I'm always here.
Did we?
I didn't read it. Never read it.
I know I read it recently. I listened to it recently. I thought it was for this.
Did Randy and I just do a podcast? I think Randy and I did a podcast on Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah,
we did a
I don't
podcast.
think we read the book for this group.
Then why did I read it?
I thought we did. Yeah, we did.
Was it before me? Because I haven't missed a group, right?
No,
I don't think I ever missed.
we didn't have many groups.
I haven't.
Well,
I
just
haven't read it.
go on to VFF, Verum Fabula Fellowship Review on iTunes and Spotify,
That's what I'm saying.
and look for Wrinkle in Time.
Well, I literally just bought it yesterday,
Well,
so I'm gonna read it.
There are
It's well worth it.
the end of Perelandra reminded me of some of the things they say. Is it the Eldila or Yarsa
Yeah.
say about
Same.
about what you can see and how he's like. What does he say? Like, what am I seeing you as you really are? They're like, you don't have the capacity for that.
It's like I'm not here as you're here.
There's some Wrinkle in Time stuff in
Yeah,
there.
there's definitely some similarities there.
It's like Charles Wallace is the only one who can really see those things. Oh, it's a
That's
good
good,
book.
like,
She references Lewis a lot without actually ever saying his name. She does that a lot in Walking on Water. She does it.
I don't think I've read that one.
That's a really good book.
We
You'll
have that.
enjoy Wrinkle in
It's
Time,
really
and then
good.
this subsequent.
I'm trying to read a
books.
bunch of classics. I read The Giver recently.
Mhm.
I read Siddhartha, The Alchemist. I read all those recently.
You said classics. Only one of those is a classic.
Well, classics for me. The books that we were
Sorry.
supposed to read in school that we didn't.
Siddhartha's a
read,
classic.
you know.
I don't think I've read The Giver.
Oh, The Giver's
I've not
so
read any of
great.
those that you
It's
mentioned.
a quick one. It's like a day's.
Are you still want to do
Day
stuff
three.
like podcasts? Do you still have a podcast fund contribution?
We could do that. Yeah, I
paid
got
my dues.
I got a discount recently. So, but yeah. So if we want to pay dues once a month, just say
$2.
$2 or $1 or $2. That would help us.
I said Dina my Venmo.
That would,
like 3 months this
You
year.
did.
That would help us fund the
Yeah.
podcast.
The
It's
Spreakers.
$5 a month.
I've been telling people about the podcast, so it better not go away.
No,
I'm
it's not.
amazed that like some people sometimes like Alex when he's like, oh yeah, I listen to like 5 podcasts. I'm like, you listen to us talk. It's
That's
just
pretty cool.
because when you're in it, it doesn't. It's not like it's a planned podcast where you're
We
like,
just
all right,
gotta
let's
roll
have a
with
discussion.
And this is all on the podcast too. So
Hey,
we probably should go ahead and close this up.
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys. This
It's
is
still rolling.
yeah. I totally forgot.
I've never been
We'll
done.
cut that out.
Yeah. So this has been the 3rd installment of Perelandra. There will be a 4th installment next week, and it's been fantastic. Next week we're set up for the murder scene and the redemption.
Woo!
Thank you guys for coming out. Thank you guys for listening. Further up.